Hello everyone. I know this type of content is very different from what I usually do, but I wanted to make this video as a kind of special. My channel recently hit 300 subscribers and I wanted to celebrate this by making something that's out of the ordinary, or at least it is for me. First of all, I'm sorry about the video starting halfway through the drawing. I did record the entire process, but the footage from the first few sessions was just unusable. It was out of focus, poor lighting, the angle was terrible. Yeah. Anyway, we live and we learn. I've been looking for a reason to talk about Harry Potter, and not necessarily to analyze it, but rather talk about my relationship with this series and my experience growing up with it. So I thought I would do so today. This video will be quite personal. It's probably the most personal I've ever been on my channel so far, but well, here it goes. I was first introduced to Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in school when my teacher read it aloud during story time. I was 11 years old and I remember being really intrigued by the story. Shortly afterwards, the movie came out and my love for this series reached a whole new level. Fantasy was quite new to me. Up until that point, I had mainly been reading contemporary middle grade novels, but I found that I had an appetite for it. So when I got the Chamber of Secrets as a birthday gift when I turned 12, I simply devoured it. The same with the movie when that came out. So it went on for a couple of years. I got The Prisoner of Azkaban on my 13th birthday and The Goblet of Fire shortly after. I couldn't wait until my next birthday for that one. And then I was caught up. Just like all the other Potterheads out there, I had to wait for the 5th book, The Order of the Phoenix, to be released. I remember it quite well. It was during summer break 2003, and the release was at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. So I went with my dad for a quiet morning walk to my local bookshop to buy it. It really was a quiet morning, but I was so excited I was skipping. And then I shut myself up in my room for about a week until I had finished it. This was the first Harry Potter book that I actually read in English, as I didn't have the patience to wait for several months for the Swedish translation. Not that it mattered, my English was good enough at that point. But I have to admit, it took me a few chapters to get used to it. And so it went on. For the Half-Blood Prince and the Deathly Hallows, I went on midnight releases to stand in line. So with the exception of the 4th and the 7th book, I was always the exact same age as Harry when starting a new Harry Potter book for the first time. This made it all the more special to me, as I could relate to the characters on this additional level. And in the intervals between releases, I would reread the books and rewatch the movies, as well as getting into other fantasy books like The Chronicles of Narnia and his Dark Materials in particular. So throughout my childhood, I struggled a lot with social anxiety. I had friends, but I always had difficulty socializing, especially in groups. When I started school, things became even more difficult. Even though I loved learning and I was a diligent student, I was incredibly shy and would never speak during lessons. It didn't make things any easier that my school had this experiment where we had mixed age groups. So first graders, second graders, and third graders will all be together in the same group or class. And then it was the same with fourth, fifth, and sixth graders. It was a terrible idea, as you can probably imagine. This made the first 6 years of school a bit more challenging, to say the least, and it was so disheartening for me because all my teachers found me lacking because I wouldn't participate during lessons. So, what does this have to do with Harry Potter? Well, a lot, actually. It didn't take long for me to start idolizing the character of Hermione. I could relate to her in so many ways, from the small things like having brown bushy hair and an unusual name people sometimes had trouble pronouncing correctly, and while I wasn't nearly as obsessive as Hermione, I had a good girl complex and I wouldn't dream of neglecting my schoolwork. But she was way more outspoken than me, and I admired her for that, for her courage to dare be herself among peers who didn't understand her, nor did they even wish to. It's common knowledge today that children can be cruel, sometimes intentionally and sometimes not. They act on impulse and without thinking about consequences. Hermione was continuously judged throughout the books by her fellow students and by some teachers, but despite this, she never stopped being herself. And this was something that my adolescent self found really inspiring. I wanted to be just like her, just as outspoken, just as unapologetic, but I was too afraid and insecure. I remember I would try to channel my inner Hermione whenever I needed her the most, like when I did a presentation at school or something like that. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but regardless, it was really comforting. In a weird sort of way, the characters of our favorite books become like your friends. You know them so well that when you reread the books, just being with them for an afternoon could have such an uplifting effect. Like when something embarrassing had happened at school, or if you had a fight with a real life friend, you could always sit down and read one of your favorite books to instantly make you feel better. So yeah, Hermione was an inspiration to me, but the whole group, Harry, Ron, Luna, and Neville especially, they were like dear friends to me and helped me through all the hardships that were part of adolescence and growing up. But the characters weren't the only thing about Harry Potter that resonated with me. It's difficult to describe the joy I felt when daydreaming about all those magical places, especially Hogwarts and Diagon Alley. It was my escape from the mundane, normal world. Rereading the books, watching the films, and even playing the PC games was my way of living in that magical world. It might sound a bit obsessive, but I can assure you I still managed the normal world just fine. I think it's very common in young teens to want more magic in their everyday lives. I was constantly craving nourishment for my imagination, something to fuel my daydreams in a way. And the story of Harry Potter and that magical world was just the perfect recipe for that. As an adult, I feel like I've become somewhat detached from that side of me. I still have an active imagination. I mean, I'm writing a fantasy trilogy at the moment, so having an active imagination feels like it's required, to say the least. But I never get obsessive anymore. Obsessive in that positive way, where you feel like you're part of something great and magical. Even though I find this really sad, I also think it's entirely normal. Life as an adult is full of responsibilities and things to distract you from your own imagination. When we are children and teenagers, we have this wonderful tunnel vision that allows us to immerse ourselves completely. That goes for both good and bad things, or at least in my case it did. This ended up being a bit more philosophical than I intended, but I suppose that's what happens when you just let the words flow. So, Harry Potter is a modern classic, but I didn't want to take this on the way I usually do with in-depth plot summaries and such. There are a lot of those all over YouTube, so I wanted to go for a more personal perspective here. I really hope you all enjoyed it. Perhaps some of you might even relate to it. Here is the finished drawing. I did end up darkening it some more after I finished it, which I did off camera. I just thought it needed a bit more shade to it. It is no masterpiece, but it was a fun exercise. This is the reference image I used, if anyone is interested. I have never drawn Hogwarts before. I actually struggle drawing angular structures like buildings. I've always preferred nature drawings as they have more irregular lines, which makes them much easier, I think. So yeah, I think I'll end this here. Let me know if you enjoyed this kind of video, and I might do it again sometime. I probably will do it again anyways, because it was a lot of fun. But still, thank you so much for watching, and let me know what you think down below, and I hope to see you back next time.